Well, this afternoon, the Africa Center for International Law and Accountability is calling on government to ratify the ILO Convention 158 to provide employment security for private sector workers. Let's speak to William Nyako. Hello, William.
Hello.
Well, what more can you tell us about this?
So, thanks for having me. So, as you know, Ghana does well in ratifying a number of international instruments. As you know, also, Ghana really pays attention to issues of labor rights. But there is this convention, ILO Convention 158, which really is very important to ensure especially protection for private sector workers. This convention came into force in 1985. And when you compare the articles of the convention to the Labor Act, for example, you see that our Labor Act allows too many grounds for example, termination of employment, which really goes against the worker. So, for example, in Section 5 of the Labor Act 2003, for example, there is an enumerated cases of grounds for termination. For example, that the worker can leave the job on grounds of ill treatment or sexual harassment, for example. Now, that is not something you really want to put in the law, because it is a duty of an employer to ensure a sexual harassment-free workplace. So if you're saying that the worker can leave, even based on that, you're actually not protecting the worker. Standard best practice is that you ensure that these conditions do not exist. When you take it back to the ILO Convention, there are only 3 grounds for termination of employment. One of which is proven misconduct, that the person is unable to do the job. But with what the convention does, which our laws don't do in protecting private sector workers, is that the convention says that even before you contemplate firing the employee, you have to give the employee an opportunity to be heard. As we know in Ghana, in the private sector, people can be fired at will. One other difference, there are several differences, but one other difference is that, in Ghana, when with private sector workers, regardless of how many years that an employee has worked for the employer, if you are fired, giving 30 days, severance. But the ILO Convention 158 says that if you are terminating an employee and you have to give compensation, it must be calculated in terms of how many years that the employee has worked, for example. So there are a number of things that if Ghana were to ratify this convention, we would have to bring a national law in accordance with that convention, which provides better conditions, better ground, and protection for private sector work.
So tomorrow is Workers' Day, of course. It's May Day, and we'll be celebrating employees. To what extent are you pushing this agenda?
We are pushing this very hard, because as you know, one of the things we do at ASLA is to monitor, for example, instruments and conventions that African states are asking to. And when we look through a lot of the regional and international conventions, and we see the gaps, we think that we have a duty to bring it up and to bring this issue front and center. Even as journalists, we know the challenges that journalists go through, because I used to be a journalist myself. And people go to work, they are not paid for several months. They do not have contracts of employment. The ILO Convention contemplates that if you are in an employment for a certain period, you must have a contract, valid contract.
Right.
Our Labor Act also provides that if your work will take you for at least 6 months, you must have a written contract of employment. But as we know, in the private sector, many of these things are not followed.
Well, one of the things that they've argued out, the employers have argued out, employers in the private sector have also said that, well, people are at liberty to quit any time, and so the employer should also have that liberties to let you go at any time.
Yeah, so an employer at will, employment at will, works in favor of the employer. It works in favor of the employer rather than the employee. It is not mutual. But if you've worked with a company for 5 years and you can be fired at will and be given just 1 month severance, you are the one that's losing.
Okay.
So it is disproportionate against the employee. And we have to make sure that, at least there is some balance in the balance of power. And as you know, with the private sector, when people start agitating to form unions, and our law does not prohibit forming of a union if you are in the private sector, they actually says that it cannot be one of the grounds for termination. But we know in practice, if you're in a private company and it is heard that some people want to form a union, they find ways to fire the person.
So the ILO convention is the best way to go, from what you say?
We would argue that is the best way to go.
Mr. Nyarko, thank you very much for your time this afternoon, and hopefully you get through with this for private sector workers like myself. William Nyarko is Executive Director of the Africa Center for International Law. Well, since we're talking about workers, and tomorrow being the day, members of Parliament are urging governments to improve upon the conditions of service of workers ahead of the May Day celebration. They've been talking particularly about mortuary workers, and if you follow the conversation, mortuary workers have been up in arms against government. They've been asking for better conditions of service, and indeed, if you look at the kind of work they do, nobody really wants to do the work they do, and so they lay down their tools. This week they declared a strike as well. We've been trying to speak to them, trying to raise them on the line. We've not been successful to get them on the line. We've been trying also to get through to Parliament and to get that, how it was said exactly for you. But we'll bring you that in our subsequent bulletin. Just note that tomorrow is a day and the parliamentarians are asking for a special focus for persons who work as mortuary workers. Well, this morning on the AM show, the TUC had some words. Listen.
To pension. What are your challenges?
Pensions has a lot of challenges, which a committee was set up by organized labor, led by TUC, to look at those issues. Some of the issues that came up was the annual salary, the definition of annual salary, which the organized labor thinks that own ideas about the calculations, which is not in the law. Again, another issue is about past credits. Again, another issue is about how our pensions is going to be sustained so that years ahead of us, people will also enjoy a very good pension when they retire from active service. TUC and organized labor realized that people retire and they go home with peanuts. And we think that think that there's a problem with the calculations of our pensions.
So, Mr. Ansa, when you said there's a problem with the calculations,
workers or those who contribute.
As I was just going to ask, when you say there's a problem,
what I'm saying is that because we felt that there's a problem with the calculations of pensions. That is why people have low pensions. So we wanted a clear cut to how our pensions are calculated. Because since you don't know the calculations, Senate is questioned to show workers how their pensions are calculated, so that when people take their pensions, they will know exactly what they are taking as pensions.